Getting feedback on your work can be really difficult, but it can be really amazing as well. So I just wanted to share with you some thoughts about what the process is like and how to deal with it. I'm Harry Bingham from Jericho Writers, and let's get stuck straight in. Okay, and the very first thing to say right up front is that getting feedback on your work can be tough. Okay, you love your manuscript, look, you know it's not perfect, but that doesn't mean that it's fun finding out about the flaws. And in fact, just by definition really, it's like you love your manuscript because you've laboured for a year or whatever to create it, and you poured a lot of your kind of creative passion in it, and look, it's not right. But it's like when somebody says negative things about one of your love objects, that's really hard to hear. So just one of the things to understand up front is that this is an emotional process and there's no getting away from that. And I've published dozens, 15 or 20 books over the years, and I can, it's still a real moment for me getting feedback on any of the sort of new work that I create. It's a sort of heart in my mouth time, and it is an emotional process, and I can definitely, some of the sort of more difficult feedback that I've received, I really remember the day when I got it, and so even when you're an experienced writer, these things just are emotional. That's not going to change. But that said, let's talk a little bit about what to expect from editorial feedback and how to deal with it. Okay, so what to expect is you're probably going to get a long written report. If you get one from Jericho Writers, and we're very good by the way, your report is going to be 3,000 words as a minimum, and it may well be significantly longer than that. The report is going to talk about what's good in your book, but it's not going to spend much time on that. Probably going to talk a little bit about the market for work like yours, a rough assessment of its saleability, and then a long list of issues and action points, and followed by some kind of summary. And that feels like really unfair and really unbalanced, because it's like, why doesn't a good editorial report isn't even remotely even-handed about the work. So it doesn't say, here's all the stuff that is good, and I'm going to discuss all of this in detail, and here's all the stuff that is bad, and I'm going to discuss that in detail. That's not really what you're paying for. It's not really what you need. The good stuff, yes, it'll be mentioned up front, but it's like, here's your little gift package from me to you, but I'm not going to spend any time on that, because that's not what you as a writer need from me as an editor. So by definition, what you're getting from an editorial report is totally biased towards the negative, because that's effectively, where the input is that you need. Okay, the kind of discussion of the market and saleability, again, it will tend to be relatively brief, just because there's not that much that can be said about it. In the end, the ultimate test of the market is getting your book, whatever it is, as strong as it can possibly be, and then you get it out to literation. So if you're self-publishing, you get it out on Amazon and see what the reaction from readers is. But either way, an editor will comment to some extent about saleability, but the real issue in any editorial report is going to be, what are the actual fixable issues in the book? What are the problems and how to fix them? So that's the guts of an editorial report. I should say different editors take different approaches, and of course writers need different things. So your editorial report might give you a long list of general issues with lots of examples, and so they might talk about your character, your plotting, your pacing, prose style, sense of place, and so on and so on and so on. Or you could get a long list of page by page specifics, which will take the form as, page 2, I'm a little bit confused by the setup here, does Michael know this or this? So it'll be sort of page by page specific issues that run right the way through the book. You always tend to get more of those kind of cropping up in the first sort of 50 or 100 pages of the book. And the reason simply is, it's not that the editor stops reading the book and just starts getting neglectful. It's that most issues that come up again and again, it just becomes repetitious to mention them every single time. So that if you look at a standard editorial report, you may have as many comments on page 1 to 70, say, as you do on page 70 to 300. And that's just because, there are lots of issues cropping up between pages 70 to 300, but they're sort of repetitions of things that have already been said. Most likely, your editorial report will combine a mixture of the sort of page by page stuff with the general stuff. And you've got to you've got to work with this properly. Sometimes, if an editor is mentioning general points about your characters, let's say, and is giving you like 3 examples in the text where this issue arises, you mustn't think, I will fix those 3 specific issues and I'm done. You've got to think, I've got to fix the general point, and those things are just examples of what the editor means. So, it's really important to sort of understand where an editor is raising a general point, and then you've got to think on every page of your text, does this point apply? Okay, and sometimes, you know, it's really specific. It's like, I don't like Aunt Edna's character, I think you need to be more X, Y and Z about her, in which case you just go through to every Aunt Edna scene and check that specific thing. But do always understand that, you know, your reaction to an editorial report needs to be holistic rather than just piecemeal, identifying, you know, responding to the specific issues mentioned. Even when the page by page stuff is there, you know, you've got to look at your whole work and look at it in the light of those comments being made. Okay, so that's what an editorial report is, that's what it is likely to deliver, but let's just say it straight. Getting any kind of negative feedback on your work can be really upsetting. And as I said, you know, I'm an experienced author and I've encountered this multiple times myself over the years. I wouldn't say I you know, end up sobbing, but definitely there is a period where you're just thinking, you're echoing with a shock of what's just happened. You're not really kind of thinking creatively as a writer about the specifics. So, you know, just go with it. Let your feelings be whatever they are, and if you want to yell at the sky for a couple of days, you just go out into a rainstorm and yell at the sky. If you're feeling angry or confused or upset or deflated or self-doubting, the fact is we've all been there, and that's okay. Okay, that's okay. That's just part of the, you know, life of being a writer. So, you know, just as being rejected by agents or whatever, that's not fun. Getting difficult feedback from an editor, that's not fun either. It's just one of the emotional hurdles that you do go through, and, you know, think of it as a badge of honor. You're that much more of a writer than you were before. Okay, but after a couple of days of that sort of emotional type reaction, you've got to start figuring out the way forward. And that's not always obvious. What I would say is this: editors typically do see problems accurately. That's their sort of core strength, that's what they're there to do. But they're generally a bit more cautious about recommending solutions. After all, this is your text, it's not theirs. And so, you know, if they see a problem with a character, they may suggest a possible response. They may suggest, look, if I were you, I would probably think about doing such and such. But they're not you, and this isn't their book. So I think you can say that an editor's, you know, definition of a problem is something you need to take very seriously. Their suggestion of a solution is, you know, it's a possible way forward. Especially if the editor is also an author, you can sort of trust them to be quite hands-on and quite sort of, if this were my manuscript, here's what I would do about it. So it's a very sort of a practitioner's view of what to do. People with a more of a publishing background, they tend to be a bit more problem defining and a little bit less solution defining, just because they haven't written a book. They're not in that sense practitioners. But as I say, editors are really good at focusing on problems. You just, there's that little bit more ambiguity when they're suggesting solutions. Certainly the first thing you should think about is the solution recommended by the editor, but you may have more work to do in actually figuring out a solution that works for you. And typically editor reports, you know, there's a kind of emotional process that follows. So I've said that for 2 days you feel frankly quite pissed off, and then, you know, there's a sort of emotional process that follows on from that. Phase 1, I've said, I'm angry and upset. Phase 2, damn it, I know she's right about X, but what am I going to do about it? And then phase 3 is, hey, I could do Y, that could be a brilliant solution, and then I'm going to be really excited, and you'll be like the young author in this photograph who's tremendously excited because they figured out a solution. And in fact, for me, one of the real defining things about getting editorial feedback is that transition from annoyance to puzzlement, which is where the sort of real work happens. You're focusing in on this problem and kind of thinking about it with a new intensity and in a new light. And then there's this sort of excitement and relief, actually, because it's very often a relief to have somebody put their finger on a problem that you sort of knew was there, but you hadn't quite defined it in your head. But, you know, as soon as you've specified what that problem is, you really understand it, and then there's the kind of relief. It's like, that is the thing that has been niggling me for months. I now understand what it is. I know what I'm going to do about it, and yes, I've got a whole heap more work to do, but there's a kind of relief of somebody has told me what the problem is and I've got a way out of it. And for me, that's, you know, it should always be the end state of receiving an editorial report. If that isn't happening, then either you've written a work of sheer genius that is basically not capable of any further perfection, or else there's a problem with your editor, or else you haven't yet reached that stage. You should have a sense of kind of excitement and relief as you sort of move out of that initial emotional sort of shock. And don't expect to agree with your editor about every single thing. most typically you're going to find that you agree with about 60% of the comments exactly as they're written. You agree with a further 20% maybe, but you want to take different corrective actions from the ones that the editor recommends. And then as for the last 20%, you just don't plain agree with it. And that's absolutely fine. This is your book. It's not the editor's book, and they are there in a role of advisor, and yes, they're kind of expert, they're impartial, they don't have a sort of dog in the game. It's just their job to give you the best advice they possibly can, but they are still just advisors, and this is your book. And if you end up saying, right, this 60% I just agree with, I'm going to do that, and this 20% I see what the problem is, but my solution is going to be different, and for the last 20%, you know what, I don't agree with you, that's absolutely fine. And I've certainly behaved in that way with most of my sort of editors in publishing, and they've been happy with that. I think I've literally never once had an editor come back to me and said, I said that you needed to do X on page 201 and you haven't done it. I've just ignored them. I haven't said I'm not doing it, I just haven't made a big deal about it. The draft I've given back, I haven't done what's been suggested. And all the editor has to do is reread the book and think, do I love this book? Is this something I'm happy to go to market with? And if they're happy, they don't care whether you've done exactly X, Y, and Z that they've recommended or not. And I'm going to tell you a little story, in fact. Okay, so the book here, one I wrote a few years back, it had very substantial revision from draft to publication. On the whole, my books don't have huge revision processes. But my editor, there was a problem with this book, and my editor nailed the problem, but my solution was pretty much the opposite of what she actually suggested. So the issue was that, my books, traditionally we sort of really engage, really grip the reader with real sort of proper page turners, and my editor felt it wasn't quite like that with this book. And definitely I'd sort of slightly moved genre, and it was a different kind of story from the ones I'd been telling in the past. It was a huge sort of sweeping panoramic sort of love story set across revolutionary Russia and sort of just post World War II Germany, and a huge epic story, and there was lots of stuff in there, and my editor was like, this isn't quite gripping, maybe you could emphasize this a bit more, maybe you could put a bit more in there, or I'd have loved to find out more about such and such. And I thought, this is I think the draft I gave her was something like 140,000 words long, and I thought the issue isn't that I need to put more stuff in, the issue is that I need to take stuff out, and simply compressing the book and making it a shorter book, but while kind of containing all the same story juice, that's what's going to do it. So I ended up just chopping out 20,000 words. I basically didn't do any of the things that my editor recommended. I mean, at a page by page level maybe, but the big things I pretty much did the opposite of what she recommended. I didn't say, hey, sorry Susan, I've done the opposite. I just sent her the book back, said it's now 120,000 words, not 140,000 words. She didn't go back to her original notes and see, have I ticked those boxes? She just read the manuscript, she loved it, we published it, it's that simple. And the best thing about editorial feedback is quite simply this: if you work constructively with the feedback, and it's how you work with it that counts, then you write an amazing book and you get a huge book deal. Okay, so that's why, editorial feedback remains the absolute gold standard way of improving a manuscript, and I massively recommend it. I just think it's a wonderful thing to do, and nothing improves a manuscript like that. But of course, it's not what the editor does, it's what you do in relation to that. So I hope this has been really helpful. If you want help on, once you've got an amazing manuscript, it's ready to go off to agents, do check out the link below this video. We've got some great tools on building your agent submission pack. You can get all the slides from this video from the same link as well if you want to. I'm Harry Bingham for Jericho Writers. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for watching.